Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Law Bulletin Seminars, Money Talks Inside Chicago Law Firm Compensation and Hiring. I'm Peter Mirswa, President of Law Bulletin Media, and on behalf of our Law Bulletin Seminars team, Amanda Monto and Adam Haresa, and our editorial team from the Chicago Lawyer Magazine and Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, John McNally and Andrea Hannes, we're very excited to have you join us for this program. We developed the program based on feedback from young lawyers, with the goal of providing you an inside look at law firm compensation structures, expectations for billable and non-billable hours, as well as business development, and then other non-compensation factors you should be asking about, like the type of practice you want to do, career path opportunities, work schedules, and more. We have an experienced panel to provide you with some great insights based on their important perspectives. Let me just briefly introduce them. First, providing our young lawyer perspective is former Chicago Bar Association Young Lawyer Section Chair and Ehrenberg Goldgame member, Dan Berkowitz. Next, we have veteran law firm recruiter, now Director of Legal Recruiting at legal search firm McCormick Schreiber, Debbie Carlson. Joining them is Assistant Dean and Director of Law School Career Services at DePaul University College of Law, Katie Liss. And rounding out our panel is former Managing Partner and now Hiring Partner at Levenfeld Pearlstein, Rob Romanoff. We hope you enjoy this program, and we'll be sending you a brief survey afterward to get your thoughts on other topics you think we should be covering for young lawyers. And with that, I'll now turn the program over to our panel lead, Dan Berkowitz.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this informative seminar about associate pay that we have dubbed Money Talks. My name is Daniel Berkowitz. I'm a member at Ehrenberg Goldgame, concentrating in insurance coverage litigation, and I am the resident young lawyer of the panel. So I'll be chiming in with my own thoughts and comments. But we've assembled a great panel of experts here to talk to you today about a number of issues and to reflect on the recent associate survey pay that Law Bulletin Media has put together and will be publishing in an upcoming edition of Chicago Lawyer Magazine, the full results of which you can reach if you have an online subscription. First off, I want to introduce Deborah Lashmet Carlson. Debbie is the Director of Business Development and Legal Recruiting at McCormick Schreiber Legal Search. Debbie has more than a decade of legal recruiting experience with two premier Chicago law firms, as well as executive recruiting experience in the banking and financial services sector. Thanks for joining us, Debbie.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Robert A. Romanoff. Rob is a partner in Levinson Pearlstein's Trust and Estates Practice Group, where he counsels high net worth individuals, owners of closely held businesses, and their families on an array of estate, gift, and income tax planning, business succession planning as well. Rob also served as the firm's chairman and managing partner for nearly a decade, up until recently, in fact. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you for allowing me to join in today.
Finally, we have Catherine C. Liss, known to her friends as Katie. She is the executive director of the Schiller, DeCanto, and Fleck Family Law Center at DePaul College of Law, as well as the assistant dean and director of Law Career Services at DePaul. Prior to joining DePaul, Katie practiced exclusively as a family law attorney in the Chicagoland area for over 10 years. Thanks for joining us, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. Now, as I mentioned, the first point we wanted to mention is the fact that recently the Chicago Lawyer Magazine just finished their 2022-2023 survey of large law firms and what they're doing as far as associate pay, what kind of hours they're requiring, what kind of compensation they have for first-year associates. And so I just want to go over some high-level data points before we throw some questions out to the group to start analyzing this data and just discussing generally law firm compensation and other sort of non-financial incentives and reasons that we're seeing for attorneys in the hiring space and the lateral movement space. So in terms of new attorneys that were hired in the past year, according to the survey, 55% were lateral hires, where 45% were first-year associates. And then that breaks down by firm size. For the really large firms, over 200 attorneys, that was 43% lateral, 57% first year. For those more mid-sized firms, 100 to 200 attorneys, 59% lateral, 41% first year. And then the firms with between 45 and 99 attorneys, they were 71% lateral hiring and 29% first year associates. Now, among that group, we're seeing that the average starting salary, as could be expected in the larger law firms, first year associates are starting out with an average of $214,000 in base salary. For the middle-sized firms, that was $204,000. And for the smaller firms, at least among the survey, that was $192,000. The billable hours required stretched anywhere from 1680 billable hours required in a year all the way up to 2050. And then there's some more information about alternative pay structures for associates taking sort of more part-time hours. But I just wanted to start out, Debbie, and speak with you. What has been your experience in the lateral hiring space in the past year? Are associates moving as much as in prior years? And if so, why are they moving?
It's a great question. I would say the years 2021 and 2022 were unprecedented in terms of movement. I mean, it was crazy busy. There weren't enough candidates to fill the roles that law firms were looking to fill, especially in the transactions area. And it was also associates were moving regardless of how long they had been at one firm. Maybe they'd only been there a year or maybe two. And where in the past, you'd stay like maybe 3 or 4 years at least, and then decide to make a move. I think a lot of them were feeling, well, I'm sitting at home remotely and I'm making this much, and I could go to this other firm and make a lot more, and I'm still sitting in my home. So why does it matter where I'm at? And I actually think that was kind of their mentality. So anyway, there was a lot of movement. Obviously, compensation was going up at that time as well. There was just a demand for talent. That was pretty much an abrupt stop the beginning of 2023. That's where I really saw it just come to a halt. And I think a lot of it had to do with the looming recession talks that we've been hearing for the past over the past year. And I think attorneys were deciding they need to just stay put for a minute. They've got a solid job, they're not being asked to leave, so just stay put. But I would say starting about a month ago, I've seen an uptick again in associates willing to have a conversation and talk about new opportunities.
And when you're starting to have that conversation with lateral hires, is it compensation focused, or what are some of the other considerations that are going into lateral movement?
It's a mix. Some people are just really in for the money, and that's great. Others want work-life balance. Maybe they're at a big firm and they don't like the grind and the hours, and they are being paid a lot of money, but to them, they'd rather have a better lifestyle and make less money. So a lot of them are interested in maybe smaller firms with a very, a great reputation. Or also in-house is kind of big now. In-house roles are pretty important to these associates who have been there for a few years and are like, I don't want to be partner. This is not the life I want. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing right now.
Rob, from a law firm perspective, how does your firm approach the hiring of new attorneys? Is there any sort of different strategy when it comes to making lateral hires versus hiring summer associates or first-year associates?
So there's been a big change at Levenfeld Pearlstein over the years as we've grown and as we've expanded our efforts to hire a more diverse workforce. So historically, people came to Levenfeld Pearlstein as laterals. I joined the firm in 2004 as a lateral. And for many, many years, from the birth of the firm in 1999 all the way through 2019 or so, we hired only lateral attorneys. Typically, we were hiring attorneys with a few years of experience who already knew the area in which they wanted to practice, and we had strong practice areas in those same practice areas. So we were able to recruit associate income partners through people we knew, or through meeting somebody on the other side of a transaction and being impressed by that person. And when the deal was done, asking the person to join us for lunch. And that's really the way we approached associate recruiting and retention over many years. And as our firm grew, particularly in the 2015 to 2020 timeframe, our need for recruiting changed. And we needed to look for other sources of talent. And we began looking to hire younger or attorneys with fewer years of experience, is probably a better way to say it. And we need to think differently about how we recruited folks. So historically, we never had a summer associate program. This year, we have 5 summer associates. Historically, we never hired first-year lawyers. Now we do. And we have a professional development program that is geared to training and developing attorneys who are fresh out of school, who may not yet have decided what practice area in which they want to work, or even if they've developed the technical skills or some of those technical skills required to practice in that area, this might be their first experience in a law firm. And developing the professional skills beyond the technical skills that are required is something we really needed to build first. We didn't want to build it after the first-year attorneys arrived. We wanted to build it before, to increase the likelihood that we'd be successful in developing our new lawyers and maximizing our client experience. And most of all, really focusing on attorney retention beyond attorney recruiting. The experience and that Debbie mentioned is an experience we had. We hired a number of lawyers. We more than doubled in size in 5 years. So retention was incredibly important after all the work we put into recruiting. It also forced us to change our compensation approach for associates. When we hired laterals in different practice areas, we needed to pay everyone competitively and fairly, but often it was market-based, based on their practice area and the firms from which we were hiring. Hiring new attorneys out of law firms required a greater measure of objectivity and consistency in pay. Hiring summer associates also furthered that need.
That makes sense. Katie, obviously you work in a law school setting in career services, so I want to bring you into the conversation. In your experience, how much are law students thinking about the financial part of their early legal careers? Is it a big driver or motivator in your experience when they're looking for that first job?
It's definitely a motivator. I wouldn't say it's the be all end all for law students. I think it's definitely something that's very important. They're coming out of law school. The vast majority of students have debt that they need to pay off. So that is a concern. But some of the numbers that you read earlier from the survey, unless you're in the top schools and graduating from those schools, the vast majority of the students will not be in the top big law firms. So I pulled a couple of numbers from just schools in the Chicago area, and around, I'd say up to a quarter of students that are graduating go into big law based on the stats that you had from your surveys, unless you're, one of the top schools where it's the inverse and 75% of your graduating class are going into big law. So the numbers that most of the students or graduates are looking at in terms of salary aren't on par with what big law is offering. So it is a concern, regardless if you're going into big law or not. But I think a lot of the conversations I'm having with recent graduates balances your finances and what they're going to make with what kind of lifestyle, what kind of choices they want to make in terms of where they're going. What does the firm represent? What is that balance? I hate the term work-life balance because I don't personally believe it exists, but to the extent that you can find that balance, what does that look like for the students or the graduates at that point? So there are a lot of questions that graduates weigh when deciding firm. They look at location. They look at whether or not there's an opportunity for a hybrid schedule if they're interested in that. And it benefits as well beyond the finances. So there's a lot that goes into the decision making for graduates.
Yeah, and that's very helpful. Katie, you've kind of just previewed kind of the next place our conversation is going to go. Obviously, there are a lot of factors and considerations for young associates when they're considering that first job or they're considering making a lateral move. A huge component, obviously, is financial, and then there's a non-financial component. So let's dive a little bit into the finances. So I want to turn back to you, Debbie. What are some of the different components of a compensation package for associates, just to let everybody know in our audience, and how should they be thinking about compensation beyond just annual salary?
Okay. Well, there's always the base comp, and it depends on the firm. I would say almost all big firms do a lockstep kind of structure where you come in as the first year at, let's say, $215,000 a year if you're at one of the top firms as a first year, and then it's every year you increase. Sometimes it's $5,000 increase, sometimes it's 20,000 or 40. It depends on the firm. A lot of times, what I see is as the base salaries increased recently, these firms would want to have the same base salary, but they would compress the lockstep so it wasn't as big of a challenge for them to keep up with. But that's the first component. There's almost always a bonus, and that's usually based on hours met. So say, it's important to ask, what are your required billable hours? And if they say 1,900 a year or 2,000 a year, that's what they expect you to bill in order to receive a bonus. Sometimes they're not like that, but a lot of them are. And I'm talking big firms too. And then, you get, the raise, that's your annual raise too. There are some firms that do sign-on bonuses or signing bonuses, and that's when it's really competitive. Like I said, the last few years when there weren't enough corporate lawyers or real estate lawyers, and they were just throwing in sign-on bonuses to get that top talent. And so that's pretty much, benefits obviously is important. Everyone wants to know what their benefits are, but most companies or law firms have a great package for their employees. So that's kind of my input.
Yeah, certainly a lot of things to think about beyond just sort of the bottom line number when considering what all goes into everything. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the term lockstep. Rob, I wanted to kind of go back to you. How are firms kind of deciding how to reward associates for their good work? What goes into a compensation decision when it comes to raise or bonus or anything like that?
Excuse me. So, Daniel, it's hard for me to say what other firms are doing because I'm looking at oftentimes the same data that we're looking at together or that people who are listening in today are going to see in the salary survey from Chicago Lawyer. We do a fair amount of market research when we enter into our compensation season every year, which is in January of every year. We don't have a lockstep approach, but we have over the years created greater consistency and uniformity while allowing us to reward our stars. So we do have budget expectations. We don't measure them necessarily in billable hours, but in billable production, because rates are not the same across our firm. We're able to charge higher rates in certain practice areas than others. And certain practice areas lend themselves to capacity for greater billing. It's hard as an estate planning attorney to generate the same number of hours that a litigator does. That said, over the years, we've seen a greater desire for uniformity And we've told associates 1,800 billable hours is our expectation. As we've seen greater emphasis placed by people in the marketplace on uniformity and compensation, we've had salary bands. Not everyone, once they're out for a few years, is going to have the same lockstep salary. It is driven in some part by practice area. It is driven in some part by market demand, because we need to retain our talent. And we want to be able to reward stars in a way that isn't just measured in terms of a bonus. But that's different than it once was. There is greater uniformity and greater transparency around that. Our bonus standards are not tied specifically to billable hours. So historically, there have been attorneys, associates, income partners, counsel, even equity members who might receive a bonus that is not driven solely by their billable production. But over the years, billable production has become far more important in the bonus calculations. And we have not lockstep bonus amounts tied to billable hours, but we have bands and ranges. The other thing that we've developed, and I don't know that we're unique in this, but it's something that we've really stuck with, is we've come up with a balanced scorecard approach when it comes to associate compensation. And I could show it to you by showing a page like this in front of you, which none of us could read, but there are 4 quadrants in the balanced scorecard. And this applies to all associates, regardless of their practice area, but also specific to their practice area. And the quadrants include economic production, which is the most highly weighted, but total contribution to the firm is also incredibly important. And that is advancing our efforts in process management and process improvement. It may be pro bono work. It may be, as associates have more experience in the firm, more years of experience in the firm, investing in innovation or even in leadership in certain areas of the firm. Each attorney in our firm has a personal plan. It's reviewed by your practice group leader at the beginning of the year, and you're measured against it. So how you accomplished your personal plan goals and whether you achieved all of them and why you did or not is relevant to the compensation discussion. And last, we have feedback systems in our professional development program that are intended to give all of us feedback every single year and then to measure our progress. So over the course of time, particularly after the first few years, how our attorneys are evaluated in this balanced scorecard approach has a greater impact in their compensation, particularly around bonus.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask, or I guess discuss a little bit about kind of the different kinds of hours that can go into an hours requirement at a firm. Just for my own personal example, I know at our law firm, up to 100 hours of the sort of billable hours requirement for our associates can be made up of pro bono, business development, CLE, those sort of, how else are you contributing to the firm quadrant, I believe is how you may have phrased it, Rob. Are those hours being considered as part of the calculus, or do you get, I guess, numerical credit, or is it more of this sort of 4-quadrant approach that you were describing?
So let's start with pro bono, because pro bono is billable work. We just don't charge for it. So we provide billable credit for up to 5% of your billable production target for the year for pro bono. So that would be essentially 90 hours on an 1,800-hour schedule. We have 2 pro bono programs in which the firm participates. So you could seek to work on matters either for either of those programs, or you could pursue other pro bono work. Other time that we have to spend as lawyers in developing our skills as lawyers or developing our book of business, if that's something that's important to us, we view as investment time. And we encourage our attorneys at all levels to be wise about their investment time. We help them manage their investment time. It doesn't necessarily go to billable time. But many of us here realize that in order to become excellent attorneys, there is some investment time required. As an estate planning attorney, it might be speaking or writing. As a litigator, it might be going to training at NEDA or whatever program is out there today for the training of attorneys. That doesn't count towards billable credit, but it does count towards our overall evaluation of an attorney's growth and progress.
Makes sense. Katie, you mentioned before about students are kind of trying to find that balance. And I believe in prior conversations we have, you may have even mentioned that a lot of them are pretty optimistic about their capacity as attorneys to create some positive social change. Are you seeing or experiencing anything in the legal market that has to do with any sort of other metrics, civic leadership, charitable, social impacts that attorneys can make in the field? And is there any sort of credit being given for those kinds of efforts?
So I do see that. I think the culture of wherever an associate ends up is very important to them. So definitely that's something that's taken into account, and graduates are looking to create change. I think a lot of them, they went into law because they're passionate about creating change, making the world better. And they still have that drive when they leave law school. So I think they're optimistic, they're positive about it. I think they still want to create change within the practice of law itself. So I see still more changes coming down the road. What those are, I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller, but I think that with the next few generations, I think the practice is still going to develop. And where that leads us, it might be a little bit of a change. It might be more, but I think students are definitely optimistic about doing something positive and getting out there, and whether it's within the firm itself or it's within different organizations like bar associations, getting more involved with the community. They're very interested in doing that and making a difference.
Makes sense. Debbie, what happens in your experience if some of these target expectations, billable hours, leadership, other things aren't being met? Are you seeing firms offering an alternative to partnership within their ranks to keep a hold of those young associates or those attorneys who might not be good for partner but still have something to offer? Or is it sort of a ship them up, ship them out mentality in your experience?
I think it depends on the firm. Some firms are a little more cutthroat than others. And, if you don't make your hours, you don't get a bonus. Or as I was talking about the lockstep structure that large firms typically abide by, you might not move up into the next box, is what we used to call them, the next box or next tier, and you'd be held back to the same level, so you wouldn't be getting a raise. So, I mean, those I think are very rare occurrences, but those are things that do happen in firms. And then, I mean, if it's a performance thing, they usually put you on a performance improvement plan and hope and mentor you. But I don't feel like firms are really that, let's push them out, let's get rid of them. They want to keep the people that they've invested money and time into you, and they don't want to just, let you go and bring someone else in. So they do what they can to help you.
Makes sense. Now moving to discussing some of maybe the non-money parts of how all this is working. Katie, you mentioned in your experience, law students are thinking beyond bottom line dollars when deciding what kind of job to take. What are some of the other things you think law students and young associates are considering when deciding what job to take or what firm to join?
Sure, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, finances is very important. A lot of times, I recommend that students and graduates meet with people, different associates at the firm to the extent that they can, so they can understand the culture of the firm, because that's very important to young associates, whether or not they'd be a good fit. And that goes both ways. Just making sure that you understand what you're getting into, and how you can play a part within the firm, and there's cohesion there. So I think that overall fit or culture is very important to young associates. I also think whether or not there's the opportunity for mentorship is also very important. Especially if you're brand new and maybe you've been a clerk throughout law school, but this is your first year associate position. It's very important for recent grads to have that connection. And now as we're coming out of COVID and we are post-COVID, I'm seeing a lot more young associates wanting to be in the office, physically there to learn, to be able to go to someone's office, ask a question. And there is that need and want to be mentored and to learn more about the practice of law. So I think that's also very important.
Yeah, on that note, obviously, speaking about being in a post-COVID world, I think hybrid working schedules is something that's a lot more common. But you said young associates really want to have other attorneys around to ask questions, to be mentored. I mean, certainly seems like there would be a push-pull between attracting attorneys, maybe associates with a little bit more experience who want the flexibility of being able to work from home versus, having them come into the office so that they have those opportunities. Rob, could you speak to how your firm has sort of tried to navigate that balance in recent months or years, and what sort of your philosophy and approach is to that?
So like other firms, this is something we've worked really hard at the last few years. And Debbie was right. A couple of years ago, any lawyer in any law firm in Chicago was getting a phone call every single day, asking them to cross the street and oftentimes offering very generous packages to cross that street. So we had to resist the urge to tell people what they must do. So we had to resist the urge to say to somebody, you must come back to the office 3 days a week. And frankly, they didn't want to. Nobody wants to be told what to do. So we really focused on giving people a reason to want to come back to the office. Luckily for us, we moved just 6 months ago and we created a workspace where people really do enjoy coming to the office. And we worked on creating an experience for everyone when they do come in, where they feel valued, regardless of their status. Doesn't matter if they're a lawyer, doesn't matter if they're another professional in the firm. We all have the same size office now. If you come to the office 4 or 5 days a week, you're going to have a permanent office. For the rest of us who want to be on a more flexible schedule, we're all going to have hoteling offices, and they're all quite nice. And we give people opportunities to socialize together. We feed people. We find opportunities to be social and have some fun together and really work hard at creating that opportunity to come in. But it's beyond that. It's also creating opportunities for someone to go on a pitch or to participate in a client meeting, which oftentimes we see young attorneys, or newer attorneys, again, I should say, really wanting that opportunity. I want to go on a pitch. Hard to go on a pitch if you're never in the office. So we need to create a reason for people to want to come in. We need to further our development of our professional development program and our mentorship program, which we have, in order to create that experience where people just don't want to miss out. They recognize Mondays and Fridays, many of us want to work from home or from a remote location, but the rest of the week, we want people to have fear of missing out, that not being in the office means missing out on some fun or on development opportunity. And we're still oriented towards trying to find reasons to encourage people to want to come in rather than telling them what they must do. Over the years, we've become, over the last 2 years in particular, a little bit hitting expectations around practice groups that Trust and Estates Group will always be in downtown on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. But it's a fine line. And we continue to work really hard to create that desire to want to be with your teammates.
Debbie, I'd love to get your thoughts as well. I mean, are you seeing the ability to work from home be really important when people are looking for new jobs, or how are those people who are sort of in the lateral space thinking about this issue?
Hybrid is definitely a top priority for people. I think they feel that being in the office 5 days a week isn't always necessary, but they also, I do feel the younger ones are wanting more contact, wanting more collaboration, and they know that being in the office is best for their growth and development. I also see the older, I shouldn't say older, more experienced attorneys who don't really need to be in the office. They like being remote too, but it really has to be a whole, like Rob was saying, a whole group effort and a firm culture that you want to be together. And I think, Rob, it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job with that, because it does mean, I mean, even if the younger ones or more junior attorneys are showing up, you need the more senior attorneys there. So I think it'll get there. It's just, we kind of all got really comfortable being able to stay at home and work. And I think we're realizing it's not the best in terms of professional growth and development.
To steer the conversation back towards sort of non-financial components of thinking about a job, whether your first job or a lateral job. Obviously, Debbie, you mentioned dealing with people sort of on both sides, moving from a smaller firm to a bigger firm for more compensation, or moving from a bigger firm to a smaller firm to kind of combat burnout or have better work-life balance.
Mhm.
What are some of the distinctions and trade-offs between that small firm setting versus the large firm setting, from a resources perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, and from an expectations perspective?
I mean, coming from a large law firm, you definitely have so many resources for you. I mean, you've got, administrative help that are there for you. You have resources in terms of marketing and you business development groups, practice management, teams that help bring in business, help with pitches, help with all of that. And that's great. And it's great experience. I think moving to a smaller firm, you get more of a sense of I'm maybe more feeling more part of the team and the organization, like you're actually part of something important, and you get more hands-on experience at a younger or earlier stage of your career, where you might not get that at a large firm. So I mean, it's either you make more money and you don't feel like you're really making a difference in the firm, or you maybe move to a smaller firm where you feel you're making your efforts are definitely noticed and you're making a difference.
Makes sense.
Dan, if I could,
please jump in, Rob.
This is a real complex issue that attorneys coming out of law school or young lateral associates really need to ask questions around, because larger firms often do have greater resources, but the question is, will those resources be available to me? If I have an opportunity for a client pitch and I'm a fifth-year attorney, what resources will I be given for that pitch? And it's not just monetary resources, it's time from the marketing team. And it may also be, would a partner in the firm go along with me on this pitch, just to come along, not to take over, not to take the reins and push me out of the way, but would the managing partner go along with me on a client pitch? In a larger firm that has greater resources, that might not happen. But in plenty of smaller firms, firms are conscious that they cannot necessarily pay the same for talent. So we invest in talent in other ways. We invest in their advancement in ways that may not be translated into dollars and cents. And candidates, when they look at law firms, need to ask questions beyond what resources do you have, but how are those resources deployed for me?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good point. And I was actually going to turn to you kind of with the next question, turning the conversation to kind of fit and culture. A lot of times success within a law firm setting is a matter of those two factors. And to your point, how much contact are you going to have with other people? Are you going to be able to use the resources that are available in that law firm setting? How would you recommend young attorneys think about fit and culture issues when deciding what jobs to take?
I encourage lateral attorneys to decide who they want to interview with in our firm. Oftentimes we want them to meet partners in their practice area, but more than once when I was interviewing lateral attorneys, I asked them to look at our website and said, tell me who you want to meet. Because people want to meet people who they might see themselves as in future years. And they may say, well, I want to meet Aaron because seems like we're on a similar path. Or somebody I know knows Aaron. I'd really like to hear from Aaron. What's it really like to work at LP? When I interviewed here, and it was a long time ago, I was interested in the financial package, but I also was interested in, would I feel pressure to work on a Saturday when for religious reasons I don't? And I've never, in the 19 years I've been here, felt anything but support from my friends, colleagues, and partners here. So it's really about identifying what's most important for me as a candidate, and then finding out whether that firm I'm looking towards or speaking with is going to support those choices. As a lateral partner, one of the questions I had many years ago is, what's the retention rate of laterals at Levenfeld Perlstein? And if it wasn't good, why? One of the questions I asked is, how many people here are still married to their first spouse? That's a question that was incredibly important to me, and frankly, it was more important to my spouse, who thankfully is my spouse today. We all make choices in choosing to work in a law firm or any work environment. And part of it is understanding for each of us, and an associate understanding for them, what's most important to me. Is diversity really important to me? And how does that firm that I'm speaking with maximize the opportunity to be an inclusive firm? Or is working in the largest deals or for the wealthiest clients really important for me? And does that firm really have the practice that will intrigue me and engage me intellectually over the course of many, many years? There are people who are out to maximize short-term dollars. Debbie mentioned that. But I think the vast majority of candidates we see truly are looking for a place where they can thrive and grow both personally and professionally. And I think too often we're not coaching younger lawyers to ask questions around those things.
Mhm.
It's a great point. Katie, I was going to sort of pose the same question to you. How are you recommending your law students or other young attorneys think about fit and culture issues when they're trying to decide their early career path?
Rob said it perfectly. Understand what your own personal values are. Figure out, is this a good fit? The firm's values, does that mesh with what my own personal values are? And will this be a potential, great place to grow and develop my practice? I think those are all important things to look at. I also think, retention is definitely a big concern for firms. And I think that part of the practice, as with just life in general, is changing. And it's great if you found your forever place where you want to be and where you want to practice. But a lot of times students and recent graduates understand they have this goal in mind, and they may not get it with their first job right out of law school. This may be a stepping stone to where they want to go. Ultimately, I hope they truly get there. But when counseling students who are graduating and looking at offers, we go through that process. Where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years? What is your ultimate goal? And does this firm represent where you want to be, your end goal? And if not, it may not be your forever place, but it may not be a bad place to spend the next 3 to 5 years at, if this is your ultimate goal, and helping them figure out how to get to where they want to go. I think is very important, and just helping graduates understand that process, that you're not locked into your first job. You can't, if you choose to change your mind and choose to go to a different practice area, that's okay too, because their practice is constantly evolving, and hopefully they do find that spot at the end.
It's a good point, Katie. If I can chime in for just a moment, I know way back sort of at the top of our discussion, you also mentioned student loan debt, which in my experience is an increasing concern among law students, young attorneys. It's something that I've participated in programming about. And I think it's a good point, as you mentioned, that the arc of a legal career is long, generally speaking. And so you may get some experience or go work somewhere where you are really looking at the bottom line compensation because you're trying to pay off student loans so that you have the flexibility to do ultimately what you want to do. If it's in the government space or the legal aid space, which might not be able to compensate you as well as a large law firm, but using those experiences and being able to leverage all that knowledge and grow professionally so that you can use those tools later on in life is important. I just want to sort of put in a note there that, look, it's okay to take a job that might not be a forever job because it pays really well, because ultimately it's going to set you up for the financial freedom for later on in your legal career. You can really chase your passion more so than the dollars. So I just sort of wanted to put that out there as my own comment on that. Debbie, turning back to you, we're sort of trying to bring all these factors we've been talking about together and trying to help give advice about how to leverage all this information when those lawyers, if they're fortunate enough to have multiple law firms they're considering, how do you leverage all this information when negotiating your next gig? So given all that we've talked about, what is your best advice for young lawyers, or we should say less experienced lawyers, who are negotiating their next law firm job?
Well, a lot of it is, I mean, it depends on how much experience you have, and if it's something that the firm wants, makes you more attractive to them. But you know, they usually will give you their offer of a base compensation, and you can always, I will say, you don't have to accept the first offer. I mean, and people are afraid to, even lawyers are afraid to negotiate sometimes. And even the more junior attorneys probably, but you know, speak up for yourself, and without being bold and coming in and saying, I want this and I demand this, but just ask. And you could say, well, you know, I've done some research and I see that this is where I kind of what the market is dictating in terms of my experience. Is there any way to possibly bump it up a little bit or something? Sometimes they can't, but maybe they could do the signing bonus, and you know, where that kind of appeases the candidate a little bit and makes them happy that, you know, they will invest in them. But I guess that's my biggest advice: is don't always take the first offer, but be grateful and thankful for, you know, what they do to give you.
What are some resources that you might be able to recommend to folks about trying to get some more information about what's going on in the market, other than, of course, the Associate Pay survey, which will be available in the next edition of Chicago Lawyer Magazine for all those who subscribe? Just got to put in a plug there for that. But what are some other resources that people can look to try to get more information about what the market is dictating?
I actually don't know of any publications right off the top of my head, but honestly, as a recruiter, I love when people reach out to me as a resource. And I always say that to people. I go, even if you're not interested in moving and this isn't the right role for you, please always, you know, keep my contact info and just give me a call or an email and ask me, hey, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about moving. Can you give me some insight onto what's the current market? And I mean, I'm not just plugging recruiters, but we do have we do have a lot of knowledge, and especially we work with every firm, you know, large to small, not every firm, but a lot of them, and we definitely have the insight into the market. So I can't name off a publication that would be best, and they're not always accurate anyway. So I think talking to me or one of the other reputable recruiters in the market would be great.
Certainly. Rob, I just want to turn it back to you maybe for some final thoughts to wrap up here. Is there anything else or any other piece of advice you think young lawyers, other than the great nuggets of advice that you all have been dropping this entire hour, anything else that you want attorneys to consider or go home with about compensation and sort of how to best navigate those early years of the legal career?
Thanks for asking. I would pick up on Debbie's comment. Candidates should do their research, and that might mean speaking with a recruiter about a firm they didn't introduce you to. By the way, that's what I did when I joined Levenfeld Pearlstein 19 years ago. I called the recruiter with whom I was friends and said, tell me about this firm.
Mhm.
It's typical, if I'm a candidate interviewing at a law firm, for them to ask me for references. But we don't often see situations where the candidate asks us for references. But I don't know why they shouldn't. So somebody interviewing with Levenfeld Perlstein might ask for references, and I would be pleased to give them references. They might be business partners we work with, other people in the legal industry, general counsel who work with us. Depending upon the practice area in which the attorney is practicing, we would provide references to them aligned with that practice area. Or we'd introduce them to people who used to work here. Maybe they went in-house. Maybe they went to a trust company. But just like they shouldn't be shy about asking what parts of my compensation package actually are variable. We often want to coach our attorneys and our professionals here. The smartest person in the room isn't the one who talks the most. It's the one who asks the best questions. And I would encourage candidates with whomever they may be interviewing to ask questions. Why did you come up with this package financially? How does it relate to the firm? Who could you introduce me to who could tell me about their experience here, either as a professional or as a referral source, even as a client? And honestly, I think in the eyes of most recruiting partners, those questions would reflect incredibly well on a candidate. Those are the people we want to hire. Those are the people who we might say, get it, and who may be interested in staying here for the better part, if not all, of their professional career, which is what we want. So I would just double down on Debbie's comments.
Wonderful. And then Katie, finally, any final thoughts from you, advice, anything for other people to consider? Oh, sorry, you faded up. You faded out. There you are, Katie.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would echo everything that Debbie and Rob mentioned. Negotiating contracts is very difficult for law students, recent graduates. So that's something that I work very heavily on with students. One resource that I do give graduates and students in terms of salaries is through surveys provided by NALP. It's the National Association of Legal Placement. They do provide some data on that, but it is regional, and it really, you can use that as somewhat of a guide, but it really is very specific as to where you want to practice, what you want to do, size of the firm. So I always encourage graduates and students to definitely have those conversations if you know someone internally at the firm, to understand the culture and to ask those questions. But yeah, definitely don't be afraid to put yourself out there and to investigate, because you don't want to end up at a firm that's not a good fit for you, and it goes both ways with the firm itself. So just make sure that you're aware and ask the right questions.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us and providing insight into all these issues. It was a pleasure to be here with you all. I want to thank Law Bulletin Media for organizing this and for, of course, organizing the Associate Pay Survey, which has a lot of good information. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you around.